I am Lisa Hale, and I live in a small blue house on a quiet street in New York, America. On a gray Friday morning, my dad, Thomas, called me into his glass office. He did not ask me to sit. He pressed a crisp $100 into my hand and said, "You ignorant girl hasn't learned anything yet." Then, without a pause, he named my brother, Ryan, the CEO. I stood still for a breath, put the $100 in my pocket, told him I heard him, and walked out. I left with the money and 20 years of work on my back. I was the one who took our small supply company from $100,000 to $50 million. I flew to Chicago to land our first big client when our balance could barely cover freight. I opened the warehouse near Denver and trained the branch team in Miami. I learned the weight of a pallet and the cost of a delay. Many nights, I sat on the steps of my blue house with a blanket over my knees, writing plans by hand and whispering numbers into the dark like prayers. What my dad and my brother did not know was simple. I owned more than half of the company. Quietly, legally, fully mine. Years ago, when we needed cash and no bank would say yes, I took less pay and bought more shares. I signed the dull pages no one else wanted to read and kept copies of each one. Those steps gave me 55% of the company. The certificates sit in a fireproof safe in my house, wrapped in plastic and respect. Only two people know, my lawyer, Grace Nolan, and my oldest friend, Olivia Brooks. Grace says, timing wins. Olivia says, pick a day and end the noise. After I left the office, I did not rush home. I took the long way down, past the security desk, where the guard nodded at me like always. I stopped at the corner store and bought bread and tea, not because I needed them, but because doing something small kept my hands from shaking. The $100 in my pocket felt stiff and loud. I walked the last blocks and stood on the sidewalk, looking at the paint I had rolled on one spring. Inside, I set the bread on the counter and went straight to the closet where the safe lives behind coats and a box of lights. I turned the dial, pulled out the folder with my name on the tab, and laid the papers on the kitchen table. The kettle clicked and sighed while I read what I already knew. I read slowly. Each signature was a step I had taken when no one was watching. A first invoice to a small shop in Chicago made me smile. I thought of Denver in winter, counting inventory with frozen hands, and the launch team in Miami cheering when the first truck rolled out on time. I thought of my dad on a Sunday, years ago, walking me through the factory and saying, "Look how clean that work is, Lisa." I wanted to keep everything clean. The numbers, the deals, the trust. Somewhere along the way, he traded clean for quick, and he taught my brother to like the shine more than the work. That hurt, and I let it teach me, too. I will not pretend I was brave all the time. That night I cried, the quiet kind that clears the head. Then I made tea and called Olivia. She listened without filling the spaces. "You knew this could come," she said. "You also know what to do?" I called Grace next. Her voice was steady. "If you are ready," she said, "we will do this by the book." I wrote a short list. Gather proof, choose the day, speak once, and plan. I set the certificates in a neat stack, slid a note on top that said proof, and put the safe key under my pillow. The house was small, but it held me. I slept a little and woke before the sun. I made eggs and checked the locks like I do before a trip, though I was not going anywhere. I opened the curtains and let the thin light in. My hurt had cooled into a steady heat, the kind that makes you move. I thought about what to call the day I would act. It needed a clean name, one that did not taste like a fight. I tried Clean Tuesday and New Friday in my head while I washed the cup. They did not fit. Monday came to mind, the day most people dread. I wanted to love that day so much it would turn and love me back. So I gave it a name I could carry in my chest. Sweet Monday. I folded my list, slipped it into my pocket, and looked once more at the papers on my table. The city outside was waking up. I could hear the factory hum in my bones, that old sound that means people are working and the lights are on, and the day will count. My dad's words still rang in the rafters of my mind, but they did not own the room anymore. My hands did. My years did. My shares did. I picked a day. I named it Sweet Monday. The weekend began with rain on the roof of my small blue house in New York, America. I brewed coffee and cleared the kitchen table, pushing aside a bowl of keys and an old plant that keeps trying to live. The table became my command post. I laid out folders, pens, a stapler, and a pad of bright notes. The air smelled like coffee and wet streets. I told myself to keep the plan simple: call a board meeting for Monday at 9 in the morning, bring proof that I own 55%, and secure the money to buy what I do not already hold. If I kept those 3 lines straight, I would not lose my step. I phoned Grace Nolan first. She is my lawyer and the most steady voice I know. We reviewed the bylaws together while the rain fell. Grace read each rule out loud, then paused so I could write. I could hear her turning pages, slow and sure. She said the chair must call the meeting, but any majority owner may demand it with proper notice and a clear agenda. She told me which notices to send and how to send them. She told me what papers must be in my hand when I arrive. We agreed on a short script: announce my stake, call the vote to confirm my control, name the agenda, then proceed. No speeches. No drift. Just the book. I sent Grace a retainer of $25,000 by wire before we hung up, and she sent back a checklist that made my shoulders drop in relief. Next came the money. I called Julia, a banker in America who has watched me work for years. She picked up on the second ring and said, "Tell me what you need, Lisa." I told her I needed a credit line large enough to buy the loud blocks before they could group against me. Julia said she could arrange $12 million by Monday morning if I signed the papers today. We walked through terms that were hard but fair: interest that bites if I let the line live too long, a first lien on non-core assets, and a covenant to keep payroll whole. It was the kind of deal you take when time matters. I signed with a clean hand, scanned the pages, and sent them back. 10 minutes later, Julia emailed me a letter that said, in plain words, the money would be ready by 9 o'clock on Monday. I printed 2 copies and put them in a folder that I labeled funds. I wanted a second wall behind me, something that did not move if the first wall shook. I called London, Europe, and reached Margaret Doyle as the evening came. Her voice was crisp and kind. We met years ago at a trade show where we were the only 2 people paying attention to the small booth in the back. I told her the truth. I might not need her money, but I wanted the ground under me to feel steady. Margaret said she would wire up to £4 million if I called before noon her time on Monday. No strings, she said, only a small fee and a promise that you will not forget to sleep. I smiled at the table. We both laughed at that, then ended the call with a simple, "We're good." I printed her note and slid it behind Julia's letter. The house held me while I worked. I pulled the fireproof safe from the closet and set it at my feet like a stubborn dog. The key felt warm in my fist. I opened it and lifted out the thick folder that holds the share certificates. Each seal, each dull signature, was a step I had taken when no one else would stay late. I laid the certificates in a neat row and made fresh copies. I added the cap table I had built by hand over the years, the ledger of transfers, and the old agreements where I took less pay and more risk when we needed cash. I wrote proof on a heavy envelope and slid it all inside. Then I made 2 backup packets because paper gets lost and people forget. I kept the original certificates close, in a small sleeve I could tuck in my jacket. By noon, the rain had stopped, and the light turned pale and clean. I ate toast over the sink and thought about the words I would use on Monday. They had to be short. I wrote a speech that was not a speech. I own 55%. Here is proof. Here is the agenda. We will proceed. I practiced saying it in a calm voice, the kind of person uses when reading a recipe to a friend. I pictured the boardroom, the glass, the long table, the chairs by the window. I saw my dad at the head and my brother to his right, and I felt my breath try to rush. I stood up, set my feet, and read the lines again until my lungs moved like they should. There were notices to send. I drafted a clean email to the board and attached a formal letter that Grace had approved. It named the time, the place in New York, and the purpose of the meeting. It listed the agenda in 3 lines and noted that supporting documents would be presented in person. I pressed send and watched the small paper airplane icon fly across the screen. Then I called the courier and asked for a same-day drop of printed copies to the two directors, Michael and Claire, because paper can calm nervous people. Claire answered my text with a simple "received." That one word told me she was still the same, careful, fair, willing to hear facts before noise. In the late afternoon, I stepped outside. The sidewalk shone, and the air felt new. I walked to the park and let my mind settle. Children ran in bright jackets, a dog chased a stick, and an old couple shared a bench like it was a boat. I stood under a tree and spoke out loud so I could hear myself in the open. "Lisa, you did the work. Now do the rest." The wind in America felt like an answer. I headed home with my head clear and my hands steady. Night came fast. I ironed a plain black suit and placed a soft shirt beside it. I set my low shoes in a straight line near the door. I packed a slim bag with a proof envelope, the funds folder, my ID, a pen that never skips, and a small notebook with a clean first page. I charged my phone and printed a map, even though I know the way, because I like turning paper in my hands when nerves try to talk. I taped a note on the door that said "Sweet Monday, 9 a.m., so my last sight before leaving would be simple words. When I was done, I turned off the lights and lay on the sofa with a thin blanket. The house was quiet. I could hear a distant truck and the soft tick of the kitchen clock. I closed my eyes and saw the factory floor, bright and alive, the way it will be again. I held the safe key in my fist and let the day slide away. Tomorrow would come whether I was ready or not. Because of the plan I made in this small blue house, I was ready. Morning came soft and pale over my small blue house in New York, America. I put on the plain black suit I had ironed and slipped the safe key into my pocket. On the kitchen table, the proof envelope sat beside the funds folder like two quiet guards. I ate toast I could barely taste and checked my list one more time. When I was ready, I taped a small note inside my door, "Sweet Monday, 9 a.m., and let the house know I would be back. The city outside was cool and awake. I walked to the subway with my bag held close, each step steady, each breath counted. The train slid under the streets, and I watched my face in the dark glass. I said my lines in a low voice so no one else could hear. I own 55%. Here is proof. Here is the agenda. We will proceed. At Midtown, I rose with the crowd and moved through the station toward the elevator that takes you up into the light. I could feel the years of work in my bones as I crossed the lobby. The guard nodded at me as if this were any other day. Maybe that helped. I wanted the day to feel normal and firm, like the start of a well-planned shift. The boardroom was a long, bright box with a view of New York laid out like a promise. The table shone like a mirror. My dad, Thomas, sat at the head as if the chair were part of him. Ryan, my brother, took the place to his right, shoulders set hard. Michael and Claire sat near the window with folders in front of them. Grace, my lawyer, stood at my side, calm as stone. For one quiet second, I let myself look at the city and think of Chicago, Denver, and Miami and all the people working because of the choices I made. Then I pulled out a chair, set my bag down, and opened the meeting. "Notice has been given," I said, voice even. "We are here to confirm control, set the agenda, and proceed with actions needed to protect this company." Dad started to speak, but I lifted a hand, the same way you steady the floor without a stomp. I opened the proof envelope and placed my share certificate on the table. The raised seal caught the light. Grace read the numbers in a clear voice. "Ms. Lisa Hale owns 55%. The room went still. Pens stopped moving. Even the air seemed to pause, like it was waiting to see who we were. Dad stared at the paper as if it could change if he glared hard enough. Ryan looked at the door the way a runner looks at a lane that is suddenly gone. Michael leaned forward, reading the seal and the signatures. Claire asked for the cap table and the ledger, and I handed them across. She turned each page slowly, tracing dates with one neat finger. "It is correct," she said, and then looked at me in a way that felt like respect and relief. Grace placed the bylaws beside the proof and tapped the clause that mattered. "Timing wins," she had told me. Today, timing has hands and eyes. I called the vote to confirm me as chair. Claire seconded. Michael said, "Yes." Grace noted the result. I felt the click inside, like a gear falling into its true path. Agenda, I said. First, remove Thomas Hale and Ryan Hale from all roles, effective at once. Second, stabilize voting blocks that may cause harm. Third, protect payroll and operations in every city, starting in New York. The words were flat and clean. This was not a fight. This was a shift change. This was a woman reading a recipe she had written herself. Dad said my name then, soft and sharp at once, and asked me to wait. He called me daughter, in a way that tried to turn time back. Ryan added a fast run of words about family and learning together. I heard them, and I let the words pass through me the way wind passes through a screen. I had done too much work to let fog hide the numbers. We will proceed, I said. I signed the removal notices and handed copies to Grace. She gave a small nod to the head of security, who had been standing in the hall. The guards came in with quiet steps. They were kind. They always are when the papers are in order. Now came the money. I opened the funds folder and set Julia's commitment letter on the table. We have a $12 million credit line active as of 9 o'clock, I said. I will use $8 million to purchase the loud voting blocks at a fair price today. I lifted a second page. I have tender papers ready for the last small pieces, up to $2,500,000. Then I showed the note from London, Europe. We also have £4 million on standby from Margaret Doyle. I do not expect to use it. Claire read both letters and gave another clean nod. Michael said, "That's enough runway." It was. We executed the buys by phone from the table. Julia kept her voice steady while funds moved. I watched signatures appear on my screen like doors closing in a storm. The cap table shifted in real time, lines of numbers falling into place as if the company were taking a deep breath. When the last confirmation email arrived, Grace printed it and slipped it into a blue folder marked done. I stood. My hands were steady. My voice felt like it had walls. Effective today, I am chair and CEO, I said. Operations continue without pause. We will meet every team this week. We will start in New York and call Chicago, Denver, and Miami before noon. Security stood ready. I turned to my dad and my brother. You are removed from all roles, I said, the way a person closes a gate with care, so it does not slam. Dad started to apologize, then tried to bargain with old stories. Ryan said he was sorry in a way that still asked for the seat back. I did not let those words bend the room. I choose the company, I said, and I choose the people who built it with me. I choose myself. They left with the guards. The door closed, and the glass trembled for a heartbeat, then steadied. For a long moment, no one spoke. The city shone beyond the windows. I looked at the table that had once reflected other faces and now held proof of what I had done. I thanked Michael and Claire for their votes and asked Claire to serve as COO on an interim basis. She agreed with a firm handshake. I asked Michael to keep the audit tight for the next quarter. He said he would start today. Grace gathered the papers with the same care she brings to every line. I sent a note to our teams. We build with care. We win with fairness. See you at 4. The words were plain on purpose. People do not need fireworks. They need a floor that holds. When the room finally emptied, I stood by the window and let the city fill my eyes. I thought of my house, my kitchen table, and the note that would be waiting on the door. I thought of the first crate we shipped to Chicago and the winter we fought through in Denver, and the happy shout from the team in Miami when the first truck rolled on time. I pressed my palm to the cool glass and felt a quiet joy rise, simple and true. I had taken a hard Monday and made it sweet. I picked up my bag, thanked the staff by name as I passed, and stepped back into New York, ready for the work that comes after the win. That night, I went back to my small blue house in New York, America. I kicked off my low shoes, made tomato soup, and sat on the floor with my back to the sofa. The room was quiet, the way a church is quiet after people leave. I looked at my hands and let the day settle. I was not the girl with $100 anymore. I was the woman who had built the company and then bought it back. I felt tired, but the tiredness felt clean. I washed the bowl, turned out the kitchen light, and stood a long time at the window, watching the street lamp glow like a steady friend. Morning brought work. I brewed coffee, opened the notebook, and wrote what we would change first. We would raise the floor wages by $3 an hour across every site. I called our finance lead, Arthur Bell, and asked for a fast model. He said we could cover it with current cash and a small trim to travel. I told him to make it live by Friday. I set aside $500,000 for a hardship fund, so a broken car or a sudden bill would not wreck a family. Numbers are not feelings, but they can care for people if you point them in the right direction. By noon, I walked through the lobby with Claire, who had agreed to serve as COO beyond the interim title. The space was glossy and empty of memory, like a hotel. I asked facilities to pull the old photos from storage and clean the frames. We hung the picture of the first crate we shipped to Chicago. We hung the winter ribbon cut in Denver when everyone's breath showed in the air. We hung the Miami team in their bright shirts, laughing with their arms up like winners. The lobby began to look like us again. Work and grit and joy. Visitors would see who we were before they saw what we sold. That afternoon, I called an all-hands in the New York warehouse and opened a live stream for Chicago, Denver, and Miami. I kept the message plain. We build with care. We win with fairness, I said. Today, that is not a slogan. It is a plan. Wages go up by $3 an hour. The hardship fund starts now. We will publish the plan for safety and hours. If the floor does not feel safe, the line stops. No one will be punished for stopping a line that needs a fix. People clapped, but the sound that mattered most was the small, low talk that says, "Maybe this is real." People changes came next. I asked Olivia Brooks to be head of people because she knows how to listen and still tell the truth. She said yes, then cried for a minute and laughed at herself for crying. I asked Michael to chair the audit for the next year, tight as a drum. Grace stayed on as outside counsel. We posted a one-page code in every break room: clear hours, clean books, no fear. I set a weekly open door, 2 hours every Thursday, and kept it. People came with small ideas that made big dents: better lighting at a dock, a new order of gloves, a simpler form for repairs. We fixed what they pointed at. Trust did not jump, it walked. Money work continued in the background like a metronome. With sales steady, we paid down $3 million of the credit line in 6 weeks and locked the rest at a lower rate. I sent a formal thank you to London, Europe, telling Margaret Doyle that her £4 million standby let me sleep on sweet Monday night. I did not need it, but the promise mattered. We set a profit share that pays out each quarter when we beat a clear, simple target. 5% of operating profit goes to the people who do the work, in dollars they can count and use. A bonus is not a gift. It is a share of the win. On the floor, we made changes that felt like fresh air. We swapped the old strip lights for bright LEDs, so the aisles looked like day. We put new mats down where people stand the longest. We set a small team to map bottlenecks, and we retired 2 machines that shook more than they worked. We added paid training hours so new hires could learn without rushing. We bought a second forklift for the West Bay in New York and sent one down to Miami. It is hard to explain how much morale lives in a working forklift until you have tried to move a half-ton pallet with one that coughs. At night, I still went home to the small blue house. I kept it on purpose. A big place would echo in a way that makes my thoughts too loud. On Sunday nights, I sit on the front steps with a pen and a short list. I look up at the dark and whisper thanks to America for the second chance. I think of Europe too, because a kind promise crossed the ocean when I needed to feel steady. A neighbor named Rosa sometimes waves from across the street and asks how the company is doing. I tell her the truth in small words. Better each week. We are learning to be fair and fast at the same time. Family did not get simpler. My dad sent a few careful emails, each one softer than the last, then one final note that said he hoped I was well. My brother texted, first angry, then sorry, then quiet. I chose not to reply. Boundaries are also work. I boxed up the old photos from their offices and sent them to a storage unit with a clear receipt. People say forgiveness is a door you open for yourself. Maybe. I think it is also a window you open to let the air move. For now, I keep the door shut and the window cracked. As weeks turned to months, the company began to breathe like a strong runner. We won a contract in Chicago because the buyer had heard our crews were treated right. We cut waste in Denver by measuring it and talking about it without blame. Miami cut a full hour from loading times by changing the order of 3 steps. Claire kept a whiteboard full of small wins and shared it each Friday. The board meetings were short, and the books were clean. We were not a perfect company. We were a good one getting better, and that felt like the truth I could hold. People sometimes ask me, was it worth it? They mean the fight, the cost, the noise, the way my hands shook when I signed the papers. I say yes, not because I won, because I stayed myself. I was the girl who took $100,000 and turned it into $50 million by doing the work no one else wanted to do. I am the woman who took a hard Monday and made it sweet, then woke up the next day and went to work again. That is the story I want to tell. If you ever hear someone say, "You ignorant girl hasn't learned anything yet," I hope you remember my name, Lisa Hale, and remember the small blue house, a clear plan, and a true share. A life can change with those 3 things, and when it does, the change is not loud. It is steady. It is fair. It is yours.